For the second time this month, Britain hosting an international summit in support of Ukraine. This Saturday's is a virtual event hosted by the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, along with 25 fellow leaders, aimed at securing concrete commitments. Notably absent, like the first time, will be the United States. Britain's Keir Starmer, along with French President Emmanuel Macron, have been leading efforts to assemble a so-called coalition of the willing ever since Donald Trump had opened direct negotiations with Moscow last month. Instead of unconditionally accepting peace, Russia's Vladimir Putin has raised numerous conditions to a ceasefire plan that has critics saying he's either buying time or has yet to change his objectives. Here's what Starmer had to say earlier.
If Putin is serious about peace, it's very simple. He has to stop his barbaric attacks on Ukraine and agree to a ceasefire. We can't sit back and simply wait for that to happen. So it's those three heads really that we're going to focus on in this meeting: strengthening Ukraine, being prepared to defend any deal ourselves through a coalition of the willing, and keeping that pressure on Russia at this crucial time.
Well, joining me on the set is Dr. Eugene B. Kogan, a Harvard negotiations expert and author of Mediation, Negotiation by Other Moves, which was also translated into Ukrainian. Hello, and thank you for coming into Paris Direct. First of all, this summit, this virtual summit in London, says it wants to maintain pressure on Putin. Is Putin feeling Europe's pressure?
Thanks for having me. Ukraine needs actions, not more summits. And that's the message that Donald Trump has been sending to Europe. President Zelensky, I am sure, appreciates the unity that the European leaders are, presenting here at this summit and earlier as well. But as he said famously to President Biden when the American administration offered him to flee at the beginning of the war, he needs an ammunition, not a ride. At this time, he needs actions, not more summits.
And such action, what would it be? Like an example of what he needs?
He needs security guarantees, and he needs...
The U.S. has been reluctant about.
And Donald Trump has been pushing clearly, very strongly, for Europe to take the lead on actually conceptualizing what security guarantees would be and what kind of military, diplomatic, political support they can offer to Ukraine. Completely understand the difficulty of the not the Gulf, but the space that seems to be opening in transatlantic relations. This space needs to be closed. The allies, the United States, the Europeans need to be together on this. But the fundamental reason is that we have a completely different American administration that is no longer, and this is a bottom line here, that's no longer willing to pay for the international public goods.
But that doesn't mean they're no longer willing to stand behind Ukraine. They want certain conditions to be met.
We're dealing with an American president here, who is ruthlessly pragmatic. It is not that he does not care about Ukraine, is that he just does not believe in providing American security like it has been over decades since the end of the Second World War, provided for the good of the world, the good from which the United States benefited very significantly. Donald Trump does not believe that international public goods like global security should be paid for by the United States alone, and he clearly has demonstrated, clearly is messaging, signaling that he wants something in return.
And what would that be? What sort of?
We see the conversation about mineral deal with Ukraine. And more strategically, though, we see the push for the Europeans to contribute more to their defense. And that arguably is a good thing for NATO. It's a good thing for the world. It's a good thing for Europe.
It's a good thing for Europe, but it's going to be slow. It's going to be a long process to do that. If Europe doesn't do so in a way that Trump might find appealing, would he push for a peace that is more in favor of what Vladimir Putin wants?
Look, Trump is interested in peace. I don't think he's interested in peace at any price. I think the conversation that needs to take place, though, needs to take place in private. We need to remember that we're dealing fundamentally, and I've written about this, with a dominant performer. And this is something that European leaders need to remember. And this is the way I coach both private and public sector teams and leaders. When you have the cameras clicking, there's only one soloist. And the real work begins when the cameras are off and when you're in the boardroom where you can really discuss deeper issues. This is the conversation I've had with folks from Canada. And this is the advice I give to board leaders and executives, private and public sector.
And that might explain the dramatic events we saw at the White House when Zelensky was with Trump and J.D. Vance.
Look, there's this indelicate expression that says, don't wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty, yet the pig likes it.
Yeah.
I am not making comparisons here between the American president and animals, but I am saying that real diplomacy takes place behind the scenes, and leaders are well worth remembering that always when dealing with Donald Trump.
And his envoy here, Steve Witkoff, what do you make of him?
Very significant choice, not surprising at all, given the role that Jared Kushner played in the first administration. There is only one type of people that Donald Trump truly trusts, and that's family. And Stephen Witkoff, who was one of the first people the president called after the first assassination attempt, it is the person with whom Donald Trump was playing golf when the second assassination attempt was taking place. This is somebody Donald Trump has known for decades. This is the person he truly trusts. Of course, the Secretary of State is important, in terms of leading the negotiations and diplomacy for the United States. But it's Steve Witkoff who we need to watch.
What about from the Russian side of things? What do you make of the negotiations from the Moscow side?
I mean, look, it's a very closed society, and the only thing that we have to remember, who is the closest person to President Vladimir Putin, who ultimately, of course, just like in the American situation here, makes decisions. On the American side, again, we need to remember we're dealing with the most unitary executive since Louis XIV. L'État c'est moi. This is the motto by which the United States government is run today.
And when you heard Putin's speech earlier this week, and he didn't say no to peace, but he did express a lot of reservations, is he buying time? Is he genuinely interested in peace, or is he trying to continue his objectives?
It's irrelevant whether he is interested in peace. It's the conditions that have to be established that make peace more preferable than war. This is what we teach at Harvard and all over the world at Sciences Po in negotiation classes. The leader looks at the alternatives and decides that making a deal is actually much more preferable, whether he wants it or not, to continuing fighting. And so, of course, he is trying to extend the negotiations to buy time, to build more leverage on the ground. That's what you would expect a negotiator to do. And yet, so it's not surprising.
Britain's foreign secretary said
Yes.
they shouldn't take into account whatever Putin's conditions are. That should be a non-starter listening to Vladimir Putin. Is that a dead end for you?
Look, in negotiations, whether you're negotiating with friends, business partners during merger and acquisitions deals, or you're negotiating an end to a war, the first step is to understand the core interests of the counterpart you have at the negotiating table. Liking somebody matters not at all. It matters that they are at the negotiating table. You need to understand what their interests are, what goals they are pursuing. I teach always at Harvard about strategic listening. We listen to the interests that are not at the table now, but for the interests that will be in the future. And that's what we have to do with the Russian Federation.
Eugene, thank you very much. Dr. Eugene B. Kogan, a Harvard negotiations expert. Thank you.